Airport is a love poem, like the last from my latest collection, which is in the New and Selected Poems. It's my 6th book of poetry. My first came out in 1982, published in London by Only Women Press. And nobody would consider publishing it in Ireland in those days. And in fact, nobody would allow me to read it for a long time. Although I do remember Emily O'Reilly giving it a wonderful review. In England, nobody even noticed that I was gay. All they noticed was the Irish words in my poetry, the Hiberno English words that they thought were so Irish. And they'd say, "Oh, it's so Irish. The rhythms are so Irish." And then when I came back to Ireland, it was just lesbian, lesbian. I have the great distinction of being the first out lesbian in Ireland. I came out in this very university in 1974 or 75 at the first women's conference, I think. And it was reported in the Irish Times, which I didn't know was going to happen. I had no idea. And I was extremely provocative on the night and had great fun, really just throwing things at the audience. Verbal things that needed to be said. And it was reported in the Irish Times the next day, and it seemed like the whole country read it, and my life was changed overnight. And I became, from one day to the next, having been a normal Irish, well-liked girl, respectable, and considered pleasant, who could be asked to any wedding or funeral, I was shunned by neighbours and cousins and old friends and school teachers, and couldn't go to, the past pupils reunion or anything like that. And people would cross the street to avoid me. But worse than that, they crossed the street to avoid my mother. And she was living in a small, nosy place. And I think there were only 2 neighbours in all the people she knew who would speak to her. And she was tremendously courageous. She was very, very distressed at first because she foresaw, as I didn't, the trouble it would lead me into. But I was so caught up in the passion of the women's movement and in the passionate love affair that I was involved in that I really didn't give a curse who thought what about me. And I'd like to say, and I don't think I often get the chance to say it, that if I had done nothing else in my life, I will always be so proud that I made the decision not to live a life of secrecy, that I decided never to allow myself to be ashamed of the people I loved. Because, as I have said many times before, if we're allowed to feel ashamed of what we and who we love, we're being ashamed of the best thing about us. And if I was going to love women, I was going to say so, and I was going to say their name in public and hold their hand in public and kiss in the street if I felt like it. And that made me a scarlet woman. And I was the only one for, I think, 10 years. And then there were 2 of us, Joni Crone and I, for about another 20 years. And I became notorious and gradually a little better than that, famous. And when I won the Rooney Prize for Literature for my short story collection, A Noise from the Woodshed, suddenly it was the open sesame to respectable society. And again, I'm so delighted that my mother was able to come to that, which was held in, of all places, the Central Bank, the reception. It was a very big affair. And thank you to Dan Rooney, who still funds that wonderful prize. So she saw me move from the dark into the light. And I continued to read love poems and to write them. And when my mother read my poetry, as she would, I know she skipped over them. She'd kind of blink as she was reading. But she once said to me, when I was bringing out my first book and they wanted to put the word lesbian, Mary Dorcey, Irish lesbian poet, on the cover. And I've written a short story about this because my mother said, "Do you realize what this will do, Mary? So many people don't get past the cover, and if this is the first word, they'll see." So she was conscious, as I was not, of the after effects. But slowly, as I hope anybody hearing these poems now will know, we have moved into a new Ireland. We had our wonderful referendum, and we have marriage equality by referendum. But still, every day, we're here, another horror story from years gone past. Things as terrible as anything that happened in Nazi Germany. We had our concentration camps, and it was women and children, for the most part, who were in those camps. And when I listen to those reports now, and I listen to the pain in women's voices, the tears stream down my face, because all those women have spoken to me all over the years, because I was a taboo breaker, because I spoke out and they could speak to me and they felt they could tell their worst secret. And so I am proud that at least I didn't keep silent in those years. I was one of the wonderful, passionate group of women who I can't name now. Irish Women United, the Women's Liberation Movement, and then Women's Studies here out here at UCD, who made that change for women and brought about a complete alteration in the circumstances of women's lives in Ireland, almost beyond our dreams. So here is a simple love poem, Airport, which could be about anybody, any lover to any other lover, man to woman, woman to man, woman to woman. And it's about the pain at the end of a relationship, when you're coming to the end, and for the first time it hits you that all the private words you have for your lover are suddenly redundant. You'll never use them again. And this struck me at the airport when I had just said goodbye. And I realized that from now on, I'd only hear the formal name that I had never had use for. I never called you by your name until I left. There was no need. I had so many others, private, public, tender, desirous, a trove of stories, the luster of old movies, some Russian novel. I never called you by your name until you left. Now it chimes through empty halls and air, resounding in the rooms we might have shared, through galleries of mirrored strangers, lost in thronged, deserted streets, lost through glass and rain and blood. Its three vowels shriek in the hidden chambers of the heart, where once unspoken, it pulsed with mine. I never called you by your name until I left. There was no need. I had so many others. One for your pleasured face, another for its sorrows.